Hello everyone, welcome to another late night stroll through the stranger corners of history. If you found your way here, it's probably because your mind refuses to sleep. So let's give it something quietly absurd to chew on. The Middle Ages, how they slept way different than what we think is normal. Before we dive too deeply, a gentle nudge. If you enjoy stories that let you relax and learn at the same time, consider liking this video and subscribing to History at Bedtime. Also, feel free to leave a comment sharing your location and local time. We like to see history travel the globe alongside our viewers. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You settle in somewhere between awake and asleep. The room is dark except for a dim orange glow. Maybe candlelight, maybe just your imagination. Outside, rain taps gently against the window, and tonight we're going back to a time when night meant something deeper, slower, heavier. The Middle Ages, before alarms, before electricity, before the cruel invention of the morning meeting. People in medieval Europe didn't sleep the way we do, not one long stretch from midnight to sunrise. They lived by a rhythm we've long forgotten. 2 sleeps. In the flickering dark of a medieval night, sleep came in chapters. There was the first sleep, a few hours of deep rest as fires dimmed and the world quieted. Then, around midnight, people would wake, not panicked, not restless, simply awake. They'd stir the embers, whisper prayers, check on the animals, or if the night felt safe, even walk outside to visit a neighbor by lantern light. Imagine the world at that hour, a village still and breathing, every sound amplified, the creak of timber, the sigh of wind through thatch, a cow shifting in the barn, no hum of machines, no glow of screens, only the pulse of night and the slow rhythm of human breath. It wasn't insomnia, it was routine. After an hour or two, the second sleep began, gentler, dreamier, often filled with vivid dreams. Historians think those midnight hours shaped the medieval mind, blending wakefulness and wonder, reality and prayer in ways we can barely comprehend today. You roll over in your imagination, feeling the scratch of rough linen sheets, the chill of air against your nose, the warmth of a straw mattress beneath you. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs. Another murmurs a half-sleeping prayer. You're not alone. You never were. And as the rain outside softens, you realize something. Medieval people didn't fight the night. They lived inside it. Now let's ease deeper into this strange rhythm of darkness, into what sleep really meant before time had rules. In a medieval home, the night began long before you closed your eyes. There were tasks, quiet rituals of survival. The fire had to be banked carefully, too small, and the cold could seep in before dawn. Too large, and the sparks might leap. A single ember could swallow an entire thatched roof. You'd probably sleep in your clothes, not from laziness, but necessity. Wool tunics, socks, sometimes even hats. Nightcaps weren't just quaint fashion, they kept you from freezing. Underneath, a straw mattress stuffed with oat husks or reeds, flattened and prickly from use. Pillows, rare, blankets, if you were lucky, one. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, damp wool, and sometimes livestock, because many families slept in the same room as their animals for warmth. You might drift off to the sound of pigs breathing or a cow's slow sigh. Not exactly peaceful, but there's a strange comfort in it. Outside, night was a living thing. Wolves prowled. The church bell marked the canonical hours. The sound of distant dogs barking could ripple through a village like a warning. But inside, the hearth glowed. And if you woke from your first sleep, that hour between darkness and dawn wasn't lonely. It was sacred. People prayed in bed, whispered confessions to the shadows, or thought of their dreams. Some even claimed that midnight waking was a time when God listened more closely. when the barrier between body and soul thinned. And in those soft, flickering hours, they might talk quietly with whoever shared their bed, husband, wife, children, servants, not about work or survival, but about life, about strange dreams, about fears, about whether the hens would lay come morning. It was intimacy born from stillness. Today, we call it broken sleep. Back then, it was balance. You can almost hear it now. The pop of wood, the whisper of wind under a wooden door, the slow breathing of people you'll never meet, but somehow understand. They didn't sleep worse. They slept differently. You might imagine medieval people tucked into private rooms, wrapped in silence. But privacy, like toothpaste and Netflix, wasn't really a medieval thing. Most families, even nobles, slept together. Parents, children, servants, sometimes guests, and occasionally animals. The night wasn't lonely. It was crowded. The shared bed wasn't just for warmth. It was for safety. In a drafty wooden house, the body heat of 5 or 6 people could mean the difference between a Council night and frostbite. A child would curl up between adults, a servant at the foot of the bed, the family dog somewhere near the hearth. Everyone breathed the same cold air, and everyone dreamed beneath the same creaking rafters. But this closeness had its politics. Sharing a bed meant sharing secrets, whispers, gossip. Servants overheard noble confessions. Merchants muttered their plans in half-sleep. It was intimacy mixed with hierarchy, warmth with tension. Even kings weren't immune. They often shared beds with advisors or visiting nobles, not out of affection, but out of formality and ritual trust. And then there were guests. Medieval hospitality demanded that travelers be offered a bed. Sometimes that meant squeezing beside strangers. Imagine lying awake at night, shoulder to shoulder with someone whose name you learned only hours ago, listening to their snores and prayers mingle with yours. Awkward, definitely, but also profoundly human. In those nights, snoring wasn't rude. It was proof of life. Breathing meant survival. You could almost measure the night by the rhythm of the bodies beside you. One snore, 2 sighs, a cough, then silence. A medieval lullaby of exhaustion and endurance. As you picture that, the flicker of firelight over sleeping faces, the faint murmur of shared dreams. Remember this, medieval people didn't just share homes, they shared nights. When the first sleep ended, midnight became a liminal space, half sacred, half strange. You'd wake naturally, the fire reduced to orange coals, the air crisp around you. Others stirred, not alarmed, just quietly alive again. Some rose to pray, whispering words from memory, thanking God for the gift of rest. Others turned to small tasks, spinning wool, mending clothes, writing letters by candlelight. In monasteries, bells summoned monks to matins, the midnight prayer, a soft chorus echoing through stone halls while the rest of the world slept. But outside those cloisters, the midnight hour had another kind of magic. It was when dreams were shared aloud, when fears came out, gentle and unjudged. The first sleep brought rest, the second, revelation. Many believed that midnight dreams held divine messages or warnings from beyond. Some even kept dream books, medieval manuals explaining what it meant to dream of rain, of wolves, of falling. Scholars today still debate whether those dreams were spiritual or simply what happens when your sleep is interrupted by cold air and candle smoke. For some, the hour wasn't holy but haunting. Folklore whispered that witches roamed between the first and second sleep, that the devil prowled for restless souls. So, a prayer before second sleep was common, a ritual seal to close the night. And if you couldn't fall back asleep, you talk, husbands and wives, siblings, servants, murmuring about the day to come or the one just past. It was the quietest hour in human history, but also one of the most connected. As you drift with them, somewhere between wake and dream, you realize how strange it is that we now fight sleeplessness, something our ancestors embraced. Maybe the night never wanted to be silent. Maybe it only wanted to be shared. Dreams were serious business in the Middle Ages. To the medieval mind, sleep wasn't just rest, it was travel. You left your body, wandered into the spirit world, and if you were lucky, returned by dawn. The line between sleeping and dying was thin. Both involve closing your eyes and hoping to wake again. Every dream had meaning, or at least someone was paid to say it did. Monks, mystics, and self-proclaimed dream interpreters would translate what you saw behind your eyelids. Dreamed of a falcon. Good fortune. Dreamed of teeth falling out. A sign of death. Dreamed of your neighbor's goat. Probably sin or indigestion. The church, however, had mixed feelings about dreams. Some were said to be divine messages. Others were traps of the devil. If your dream made you too confident, too curious, or too happy, it was suspicious. After all, the devil worked best in comfort. Nightmares weren't just bad dreams. They were attacks. People believed in night demons, shadowy figures that Saturday on your chest and pressed the air from your lungs. In Old English, they were called mare, the root of nightmare. The sensation we now call sleep paralysis, half awake, unable to move, heart racing, was once proof that evil had visited your bed. But not all dreams frightened them. Some gave comfort. There are records of people dreaming of loved ones who died, sitting at the edge of their bed, smiling silently. These dreams were sacred, proof that death wasn't truly separation. Scholars still debate whether medieval people dreamed differently because of segmented sleep, two halves, each filled with vivid imagery. Maybe that midnight break sharpened the imagination, or maybe when your world was quieter and darker, dreams simply had more room to grow. Now, not everyone dreamed the same way. A peasant's dreams were of harvests, weather, and health, things that decided whether their family would eat. But nobles dreamed in gold leaf. Medieval kings often believed their dreams were divine instruction. A vision of victory meant go to war. A dream of disaster meant fast and pray. And if you dreamed of your enemy kneeling, well, best not question divine approval. Monks, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt, even in sleep. There are writings from cloisters where monks confessed to sinning in dreams, as if thoughts behind closed eyes could damn them. They prayed for forgiveness at dawn, begging God to ignore the strange theater of their sleeping minds. One obscure diary from a 13th century abbey tells of a monk who dreamed he was chased by an enormous chicken. He wrote that he awoke with heart troubled and begged God for meaning. No meaning was found, but the entry remains, proof that even the holiest minds dreamt nonsense. And then there were the visionaries, mystics, who claimed their dreams were prophecy. Take Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, who said her dreams were messages from heaven. She wrote books, composed music, even advised emperors, all because of what she saw at night. Some historians say she was epileptic. Others say she was touched by something divine. Either way, she reminds us, dreams for medieval people were not escapes from life. They were life. One more way the soul tried to make sense of God, guilt, and everything in between. As the night deepened and the coals in the hearth faded to red embers, dream and reality became almost the same. You can imagine them, peasants, monks, nobles, lying beneath wooden beams, their minds full of strange symbols. Their faith woven through every shadow. Winter, in the Middle Ages, was not a season, it was an endurance test. Nights stretched for nearly 16 hours. The world outside frenzy into silence, and sleep became not just rest, but strategy. Peasants didn't simply sleep longer. They hibernated. In parts of northern Europe, families would retreat to a single room, block every crack with straw, and pile together under layers of wool and fur. They'd sleep in cycles, a few hours awake, then a few asleep, conserving candles, conserving food, conserving warmth. It wasn't laziness, it was survival through stillness. In some villages, people reportedly spent entire days half dreaming, wrapped in blankets, rising only to feed the fire or stir a pot of thin soup. Farmers called it wintering, and it blurred the line between waking life and dreams. Historians still debate whether these semi-hibernations were deliberate or simply unavoidable. Either way, people slowed to the rhythm of the cold. And yet, life went on. Cows needed milking, bread needed baking. So families adjusted. One person rose early to stoke the fire, another prayed quietly, while the rest stayed wrapped in sleep, their breath frosting the air like ghostly prayers. By morning, the world was a monochrome hush. No birds, no leaves, just the creak of wood and the sigh of wind against the shutters. In those months, time lost its sharp edges. The Middle Ages may have been dark, but winter made even the days dreamlike. Perhaps that's why medieval sermons often warned against winter sloth, because while the church saw idleness, ordinary people saw peace, a rare chance to pause the world. And in those long, cold nights, they learned something we've forgotten, that rest itself could be an act of faith. The bed, humble or grand, was the stage for half of medieval life and nearly all of its mysteries. Forget crisp linen and memory foam. Medieval beds were more like inventions than furniture, layered contraptions of wood, rope, hay, and luck. Poorer families slept on straw pallets stuffed with whatever they could find: hay, moss, feathers if they were fortunate. Over time, the straw flattened and smelled faintly of earth, animals, and life itself. They called it a tick, a word that sounds charming until you remember what else might have shared it with you. Wealthier homes, though, turned sleep into spectacle. Nobles' beds were canopied like small fortresses, draped with tapestries to block drafts. And, if we're honest, to show off. The bed wasn't just for sleeping, it was for meetings, births, business, and sometimes diplomacy of the romantic kind. A visiting dignitary might sit at the foot of a king's bed to discuss treaties, while servants stood guard, a level of awkward intimacy modern leaders rarely face. The ropes beneath the mattress had to be tightened regularly, which is where the phrase "sleep tight" comes from. And when you said it in the 13th century, you weren't wishing comfort, you were reminding someone not to fall through the frame at 2A. In monasteries, beds were simpler, a wooden plank with a thin blanket. Monks weren't supposed to sleep too comfortably. Temptation, they said, begins in softness. Yet even the strictest abbots admitted that a cold cell and hard bed sometimes led to holy daydreams. And somewhere in between the palaces and the cloisters, there were the ordinary people, weavers, bakers, shepherds, lying in uneven beds, listening to rain on the roof, and dreaming of better straw. When we picture medieval beds, we often see discomfort, but to them, it was sanctuary, a fragile, creaking fortress against the chill, against hunger, against time, because no matter your rank or faith, every night ended the same way, with a body giving in to sleep, and the world briefly becoming kind. In the Middle Ages, night wasn't quiet. It just sounded different. There were no engines, no hum of electricity, but the dark had its own orchestra. Wind sighing through thatched roofs, dogs barking in uneven rhythms, the soft rhythmic clatter of a loose shutter, sometimes a cow lowing in the distance, or the echo of a church bell marking an hour nobody could see. Most people didn't fear the night itself. They feared what might be out there: wolves, spirits, thieves, or simply the unknown. A farmer would bolt the door, whisper a prayer, and listened to the world settle around him. And in those moments of half silence, he'd hear the heartbeat of his home, the steady breath of his sleeping family, the faint crackle of dying embers, the sound of his own pulse. Villages were alive in the dark. Someone was always awake, tending to a baby, a fire, or their thoughts. The night watch made rounds with lanterns that flickered like floating stars, their footsteps echoing against cobblestone. The sound of footsteps at night was both comfort and dread. Was it the watchman or something else? Historians have found letters describing how people would sometimes wake, go outside, and simply stand. Look at the stars, listen, think. The medieval night was contemplative, dangerous, yes, but deeply spiritual. To walk under the moon was to see the world stripped bare, just shadow, sound, and your own breath. The silence wasn't total, it was alive. And if you listen closely enough, even now, in your own quiet room, you can almost hear it. That same ancient stillness that lulled them to sleep 1,000 years ago. Before alarm clocks, before glowing screens, the rhythm of sleep and life was ruled by bells. The church, quite literally, told people when to wake, when to eat, when to sleep, and when to pray. Every monastery, and eventually every town, had a bell tower. The bells didn't just mark time, they created it. Matins at midnight, lauds at dawn, prime after sunrise, and so on through the day and night. The hours were not mechanical, they were holy. Time itself was divine property, not a human invention. Imagine living in a world where your day began not with an alarm, but with sound rolling through misty air, a low, mournful toll summoning souls to prayer. The bells could be heard for miles, echoing over fields and rivers, bouncing off stone and wood. They stitched the countryside together, turning isolation into rhythm. But not everyone appreciated the constant reminder. There are medieval complaints, actual records of peasants grumbling that the monks' bells woke their cows. Others said the sound carried bad luck if heard before sunrise. Still, to most people, the bells were the heartbeat of community. They told time, yes, but also mortality. Every toll was a reminder. You were awake, alive, and expected to make something of the day. In some villages, when the church bell stopped due to war, fire, or plague, people said time itself had stopped. And, in a way, it had. When clocks arrived centuries later, they didn't replace the bells. They just privatized them. Now, instead of a single rhythm shared by everyone, each person carried their own ticking god on their wrist. And while it made us punctual, it also made us lonely. Because in the Middle Ages, even time was communal. You didn't own your hours, you shared them. In the Middle Ages, sleep was never simple. It was full of invisible company. People didn't go to bed alone in the way we think of it. They believed dreams were doors, and doors could be opened by anything, saints, spirits, or something darker. Before lying down, many whispered a charm, or crossed themselves 3 times. Others sprinkled holy water on the bedposts, or tucked sprigs of herbs under the pillow. Lavender for calm, rosemary for protection, and, strangely enough, dill to keep away witches. It wasn't uncommon to find a small carved charm or a cross pinned to the canopy above a bed, because at night the world thinned, and when the candlelight flickered just right, it was easy to believe something was watching from the shadows. There were tales, always whispered, of those who slept facing north and never woke, or who dreamed of black dogs before sickness came. Some said that cats carried souls through dreams, others that the devil Saturday on the chest of those who mocked the church. And yet, despite the fear, there was comfort in ritual. To sleep was to surrender, and surrender required faith. Monks in cloisters often wrote of visitations, dreams where angels appeared or voices spoke from nowhere. But for every divine visitation, there was a darker story, a nightmare taken as proof that sin had crept too close. Dreams could bless or accuse. Either way, the night was a judge. And so medieval people didn't close their eyes casually. They did so with reverence, as if stepping across a line between this world and another, a fragile threshold lit only by the last flicker of the hearth. Firelight was everything. It wasn't just warmth, it was time, safety, companionship, and prayer all in one glowing, unpredictable thing. Every medieval night began and ended with fire. You'd sit beside the hearth, staring at the flames until your eyes burned, your body heavy for heat and smoke. The fire was hypnotic. It danced, cracked, whispered. It was the only thing that truly moved in a world that slept early and woke late. In villages, people spoke softly by firelight, gossip, prayers, lullabies. It was where stories were told, and where they lingered longest. The fire's rhythm shaped language itself. Our oldest tales were built to match its flicker, its slow, hypnotic pacing. Even the church, suspicious as ever, couldn't stop people from gazing into flames and finding meaning there. Firelight also created a strange kind of intimacy. It revealed just enough of a face, a hand, a glint of thought, and hid the rest. In its glow, reality softened. Lovers whispered, children and seed, elders remembered. The fire didn't just illuminate, it forgave. At night, the fire also served as a clock. As it burned lower, so did the night. When it turned to embers, people knew it was time for the second sleep. And in wealthier homes, servants were tasked with banking the fire, covering coals in ash to keep them alive until dawn. It was considered bad luck to let the fire die completely. A dark hearth was an omen, a home that had lost its heart. Imagine it, the red glow painting the walls, shadows swaying with each breath of flame, the faint smell of wood smoke and wool. You can almost feel your eyes grow heavy. In that world, the fire didn't just warm the body, it cradled the soul. In the Middle Ages, before gaslight, before clocks, before the mechanical heartbeat of modern life, the moon was the master of sleep. Its light decided everything. When people worked, when they prayed, when they feared, and when they dreamed. When the moon was full, villages glowed with a ghostly silver hue. Farmers used that brightness to work late into the night, and travelers who feared bandits and wolves dared to walk unfamiliar paths. A full moon was both gift and warning. It offered light, but it also stirred superstition. People whispered that the moon could make you mad. Moonstruck, they called it. The word lunatic was born from Luna, the moon's name. The moon wasn't just a rock in the sky. It was an influence, a personality. Medieval physicians believed it controlled the body's fluids, the humors that balanced health and mood. A doctor might time your bleeding, your healing, or even your sleep based on its cycle. To them, you weren't just sleeping beneath the moon, you were sleeping with it, in rhythm, in influence, in quiet surrender. And above the moon were the stars. Thousands of tiny punctures in the dark. Monks and astrologers charted them from towers and monasteries. convinced that they spoke in code, a divine map of destiny. For most, though, stars were simpler. They were comfort, a nightly reminder that, even in the deep dark, something still shimmered. In the countryside, where no city lights dimmed the heavens, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled flour. Children were told it was the path of souls, or the trail angels left as they crossed from heaven to earth. You can imagine them, villagers standing in the cold, looking upward, feeling both small and infinite all at once. Historians still debate how much astronomy medieval people truly understood, but perhaps that misses the point. For them, the stars didn't need to explain, they only needed to shine. If peasants shared straw and monks prayed for forgiveness before bed, then kings slept on theatre stages. Royal sleep was performance, half comfort, half politics. A king's bedchamber was a statement, tapestries of saints and battles, embroidered pillows stuffed with swan down, curtains woven from gold thread. The bed itself was elevated, literally, often placed on a dais, so visitors had to look up when addressing the monarch. But that grandeur came with rules. A royal bed was never entirely private. Attendants, guards, scribes, even jesters sometimes slept nearby, ready to serve or witness. Sleep, even for kings, was public property. The queen's chambers were little different. Royal women might share their beds with ladies in waiting or visiting nobles, partly for warmth, partly for protection. A queen's slumber was a matter of state. A healthy sleep meant a healthy heir, a nation's future wrapped in blankets of velvet and expectation. And yet, despite all the luxury, royalty envied simplicity. Letters survive of queens longing for a quiet room, for sleep without ceremony. King Henry II once joked that the hardest part of being king was sleeping under a crown you can never take off. Even in palaces, knights had their fears. Dream interpreters followed monarchs from court to court, ready to explain omens. A dream of drowning meant treachery. A dream of a serpent meant betrayal. A dream of flying, dangerous arrogance. Kings listened carefully, because sometimes a single dream could change history. You can almost picture it now, a king, restless beneath brocade sheets, staring at a flickering candle, wondering whether God still favored him, or whether the silence of the night meant something else. Royalty could command armies, but not their own dreams. And in that sleepless truth, they were as human as the poorest peasant. When the sun vanished, the medieval world shrank to the radius of a candle flame. Everything outside that small glow became mystery, and from that mystery came stories. Candles were precious. In poor homes, a single flame might be all the light a family had for the entire evening. It wasn't wasted on work. Instead, they'd sit close, shadows flickering across the walls, and talk. The night became a storyteller's stage. This was the birthplace of tales. Before books, before ink, before once upon a time was written down. Myths of ghosts, saints, and tricksters passed from lip to lip, carried by firelight. The same shadows that frightened children also fueled their imagination. In those dim rooms, time softened. A father might tell his children of saints walking the countryside, or of a knight who never slept because he made a vow to guard the moon. Someone would add a detail, someone else would laugh, and slowly the story would evolve. By morning, it was a legend, and by the next generation, a belief. Even the flicker of the candle was part of the storytelling, unpredictable, alive. Sometimes it would dance when a certain name was spoken, or dim when a ghost appeared in a tale. Coincidence, of course, but in a world so dark, even a shadow could feel divine. The wealthy, meanwhile, turned candlelight into luxury. Beeswax candles burned brighter and cleaner than tallow, their honey-sweet scent perfuming the air. The poor used animal fat, cheaper, smokier, and faintly rancid, so even the smell of night divided the classes. But whether in castles or cottages, the rhythm was the same. The flame, the voice, the silence, the story, a fragile loop of human comfort against the infinite dark. And as eyelids drooped and candles guttered, stories melted into dreams, the original bedtime ritual. In the daytime, medieval life belonged to noise, markets, work, prayer, survival. But at night, the thinkers awoke. The quiet after dusk was the scholar's paradise. Monks hunched over parchment, their faces glowing in candlelight, copying texts line by line. You can almost hear the soft scratch of the quill, the heartbeat of human memory being written down. In universities like Bologna and Paris, night reading was an official practice. Students gathered in dim lecture halls to debate philosophy by torchlight. To them, darkness sharpened the mind. It was intimate, secret, pure. Night was when questions could be asked that daylight would judge too harshly. Medieval scholars didn't separate faith and science. They wove them together. Astronomy was a way to read God's handwriting. Medicine was a search for divine balance. And sleep, that mysterious daily surrender, was studied as a spiritual act. One 12th century text called the Book of Hours suggested that dreams could reveal the true pattern of a man's soul. Another advised that studying too long by candlelight could melt the eyes, a charmingly medieval way to describe eye strain. In monasteries, science was law, so at night, thought became its own form of prayer. The flicker of flame, the murmur of turning pages, the smell of ink and beeswax. This was the soundscape of progress. Ironically, much of what we call the Age of Faith was preserved by insomniacs, those who stayed awake so others could sleep in ignorance no more. Knowledge, it turns out, was born of sleeplessness, and as the candles burned low, scholars would pause, not from exhaustion, but reverence, because in that fragile hour between wakefulness and dream, they knew even the smallest light could change the world. Before lavender-scented candles and sleep apps, the medieval world had its own science of slumber, one built on faith, flowers, and a little bit of superstition. People believed smells could shape dreams. So before bed, homes were filled with the scent of crushed herbs and burning resin. Lavender was said to calm the spirit, sage to cleanse the air of evil, and chamomile to summon gentleness. In monasteries, monks burned frankincense and myrrh before the evening prayers, the same scents once offered to kings and gods. For peasants, remedies were humbler but no less ritualized. A small linen pouch of herbs might hang over a bed, or a cup of warm wine mixed with honey and valerian root was taken before sleep. It wasn't called self-care, it was called stewardship of the soul. And there were stranger methods. Some believed sleeping with an apple under the bed could absorb bad dreams. Others swore that a sprig of mint placed beneath the tongue would keep one's thoughts pure through the night. In some villages, healers even brewed moon tea, herbs left out overnight to soak in dew and starlight. They believed it captured heaven's gentler light, something too soft for the sun to touch. The wealthy turned scent into spectacle, perfumed pillows, rosewater baths before bed, and even gold thread sachets embroidered with verses to keep nightmares away. But the intent was always the same, to make the night kind. Even hospitals of the time were filled with fragrance. Medieval doctors, called physicians of sleep, believed that illness could be soothed through scent. Frankincense for breathing, rosemary for melancholy, rose oil for grief. To them, healing wasn't just about the body, it was about helping the soul rest. Close your eyes and imagine it, a stone room, a small flame flickering, and the faint perfume of herbs rising into the rafters. Even in their darkness, they sought light, not through sight, but through scent. To a medieval mind, sleep wasn't an escape from life, it was part of the soul's pilgrimage. Each night, you practiced dying gently, safely, and with faith that you'd wake again. The church taught that sleep mirrored death, the body still, the spirit wandering. And so, prayers before bed weren't optional. A simple, "If I should die before I wake," carried centuries of theology behind it. Many believed that dreams were a bridge, that while the body rested, the soul could glimpse heaven, or purgatory, or the warning edge of hell. A dream wasn't dismissed, it was examined. Was it divine? Temptation? A test? Even scholars argued about it. Saint Augustine wrote that dreams were the theatre of the soul, but later theologians warned not every vision in the dark was sent from God. For monks and mystics, sleep was a sacred act of surrender. They saw rest not as laziness, but obedience, an acknowledgement that even the holiest must lay down their burdens. It was, in its own quiet way, an act of humility. Some even recorded their dreams as confessions, visions of angels, voices of loved ones, even nightmares. All were written in soft Latin on parchment by candlelight. A monk might wake before dawn, still trembling, and whisper, the Lord spoke to me, or perhaps the devil tried to. To the medieval sleeper, the night was not empty. It was full of meaning, of fear, of faith. When their eyes closed, their souls continued their journey. And if they woke before the morning bell, they didn't panic like we do today. They simply smiled, whispered a prayer of thanks, and waited for the second sleep, that gentle, sacred return to peace. When dawn finally arrived in the Middle Ages, it didn't burst, it crept. Light seeped into the world slowly, like ink soaking through parchment. The first to wake were often the poorest, the bakers, the herdsmen, the monks. They rose quietly, not from alarm clocks, but from habit, prayer, and hunger. Roosters crowed long before sunrise, their voices echoing across frost and fog. Chimneys began to smoke again. Dogs stirred, and a smell of fresh bread mixed with a faint sweetness of dew. The second sleep ended, and with it the night's enchantment. People didn't rush. They stretched, prayed, and whispered soft greetings. In that dim grey light, dreams still clung to them, not gone, but fading like mist. A mother might tell her child, "I saw your grandfather in my dream. He was smiling." A farmer might say, "I dreamed the frost would lift today." Dreams were part of conversation, not dismissed, but honored, as if the soul had been out gathering secrets while the body rested. Monks chanted lauds, the dawn prayer, their voices echoing through cold stone halls. And in towns, bells rang to summon the living. The same bells that ended the first sleep now marked the day's beginning. It was a cycle, sound to silence, darkness to light, breath to prayer. The medieval morning wasn't efficient. It was reverent, a reminder that life itself was rhythmic, that waking was sacred, not automatic. And as the sky brightened to gold, the world returned, patient, imperfect, and beautifully alive once more. So now, as our journey through the medieval night comes to its end, take one more deep breath. You've walked through candlelight and cold stone, through the quiet rhythm of a world that knew how to rest. Imagine the last embers of a medieval hearth, faintly glowing, warm enough to outlast the dark. The family inside stirs gently. Someone hums a prayer, someone else adds a log to the fire. Outside, the first light touches the rooftops. The air smells of smoke, damp earth, and bread. It's morning, but not the kind we know. No rush, no screens, just slow waking, a world exhaling after the long dream of night. The people of the Middle Ages slept differently. Yes, but maybe they lived differently too. They treated rest as sacred, not wasted. They feared dreams, respected them, even learned from them. And in the space between first and second sleep, they found something modern life has mostly lost: stillness. We call them primitive, but they understood something profound. That darkness wasn't the enemy of life, it was its partner. That rest didn't mean doing nothing. It meant returning to balance, and that every sunrise felt earned. So, as you listen to the last notes fade, imagine that same light slowly filling your room. Soft, golden, patient, Let your breath slow, your thoughts drift. The fire of the day can wait. For now, you are safe. You are warm. You are home. And as the medieval world once whispered before their second sleep, may the night be kind, and may morning find you whole. Good night.